The email came in at exactly 2:46 a.m. I remember the moment not because I was expecting it, but because I was finally breathing. 35,000 feet above the Atlantic. The cabin lights were dimmed. The hum of the engines was steady. And for the first time in nearly a year, I let myself relax. We had done it. 3 continents. 10 months of negotiations. A $2 billion strategic partnership signed, sealed, and delivered in Dubai just hours earlier. It was the biggest deal OrientX had ever touched. And I had built it. Every piece. From the first whisper of a proposal to the last line of the legal clause mine. So when my phone buzzed and I saw the subject line, employment termination, notice, effective immediately, I thought it was a mistake. He blinked, refreshed the screen, and then read it again. Your access has been revoked. Please refrain from engaging with any OrientX clients or representatives moving forward. Effective immediately. No call, no explanation, no thank you. Just silence. And a digital knife between the ribs. I looked around the cabin. Everyone else was asleep tucked into business class pods with half-empty glasses of champagne and cashmere blankets pulled to their chins. The world below us was silent. And suddenly, so was mine. They didn't wait for me to land. They didn't give me a meeting. They didn't even look me in the eye. I had just delivered the single largest strategic win in the company's history. And they erased me with a 4-sentence email mid-air, mid-flight, mid-victory. I should have panicked. I should have cried. But I didn't. Because somewhere deep down, I realized. They hadn't just fired me. They had freed me. And they had no idea what I had already started. Her name is Casey Morgan. And for 7 years, she was the woman OrientX called when everything was on fire. Not when things were going well. Not when they were handing out titles and press coverage and employee of the quarter brunches. But when the numbers dipped, when the partners got cold feet, when the language in the contract didn't quite pass legal. That's when her phone rang. Always after 9 p.m. Always with the words, Casey, we need you on this. She didn't come from legacy. Didn't have a family name etched in venture capital or an uncle on the board. She built her reputation from nothing but results. Berlin, Singapore, Montreal. She moved through time zones the way most people move through playlists. Fluent in German and Mandarin. Sleeps light, thinks fast. She once rewrote an entire cloud infrastructure agreement between midnight and sunrise because the client's general counsel had just one more concern. By morning, the deal was not only back on the table, it was bigger. But here's the thing about being indispensable behind the scenes. You're rarely invited to the front. Casey never asked for credit. Never demanded applause. She didn't show up in glossy interviews or branded coffee mugs. But she was the one who turned maybe next quarter into funded and launching. She made chaos look like choreography. And all she asked for was a seat at the table. But the table never opened up. Instead, they called her a field operator. A deal closer. I, too. Someone who executes well under pressure. Not someone who leads. Not someone you promote. When OrientX was expanding into Asia, she built the entire partner network from scratch. No roadmap. No team. Just a battered MacBook and 3 weeks in a hotel with unreliable Wi-Fi. The partnership brought in $120 million in the first year. Her name wasn't on the press release. She brushed it off. Focused on results. Told herself, maybe next time they'll see me differently. But next time came and went. And every time, someone else stood under the spotlight. Usually a man with less experience, but a louder voice. Casey learned how to carry success in silence. She learned how to swallow disappointment and keep working anyway. Because the mission mattered. Because the clients mattered. Because somewhere inside, she still believed that loyalty would pay off. But over time, that belief began to crack. Not with an explosion. Not with a betrayal worthy of headlines, Just 100 small signs. Like her ideas showing up in other people's decks. Like promotions being under review for over a year. Like the CFO forgetting she even led the Tokyo negotiations. And still she didn't walk away. Because she wasn't done. Not with them. But with herself. Casey Morgan wasn't just building someone else's legacy anymore. She had started something quiet, small, dangerous, in the best way. And when the moment came, she wouldn't ask to be seen. She would make herself undeniable. They called it a strategic leadership transition. A clean phrase, polished with PR varnish. But everyone inside OrionX knew exactly what it meant. It meant Evan Lambert, son of Chairman Gerald Lambert, was getting the number 2 seat. Not because he earned it. Not because he delivered anything groundbreaking. But because legacy, apparently, could be inherited while merit had to wait in the hallway. Casey heard the whispers before the official memo even went out. There had been murmurs for months. Evan shadowing board meetings. Evan attending executive offsites. Evan asking surface-level questions and getting thunderous praise for a fresh perspective. He had an MBA he barely used, a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords, and a resume padded with internships that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Director of Vision Execution at his dad's investment firm? That's not a job. That's a trust fund in a suit. The leadership team, most of them, men over 50, welcomed Evan like he was some sort of prodigy. They nodded gravely when he repeated ideas Casey had presented 6 months earlier. They clapped when he suggested streamlining synergy channels, whatever that meant. And when Casey voiced concerns about his lack of experience, she was told to mentor the next generation. Translation: train him. Support him. Don't challenge him. She wasn't surprised. Not really. She'd seen this game before. Loyalty wasn't rewarded. It was expected. And women like her, the ones who delivered, were rarely the ones who ascended. Still, it stung. Because just a few weeks before Evan's appointment, Casey had been informally pitched as the next VP of strategy. She'd closed 3 major partnerships that quarter. She had senior clients sending handwritten notes of thanks. She had built infrastructure in markets they didn't even know how to pronounce. But when the decision time came, it wasn't a debate. It was already done. One of the board members, someone she had once briefed for 14 hours straight before a shareholder presentation, pulled her aside in the hallway. "You've done great work," he said, almost kindly. "But you're just a bit intense, Casey." And Evan, well, he's got that soft leadership quality. He puts people at ease. She smiled, nodded, said nothing. But inside, something turned cold. Because what he meant was, Evan is safe. Evan won't outshine us. Evan won't challenge our comfort. Casey did. Not by being loud. Not by being difficult. But by being brilliant. By knowing her numbers. By saving deals. By being the one clients wanted to talk to when things went wrong. And they couldn't control that. So they minimized it. She was the one with the blueprint. He was the one who printed it out and smiled for the cameras. The week Evan was formally promoted, Casey wasn't even invited to the press briefing. Her name was left off the internal release. Her email access to investor folders was quietly revoked. And just like that, she was made invisible. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded in ways that couldn't be easily absorbed by the boys' club upstairs. She didn't get angry. She didn't beg. She just watched it happen. And made a decision. If they refused to see her as part of the future, she'd build one where they didn't exist at all. It started with a slide deck. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just an open document. With the wrong name on it. Casey had been working on the proposal for weeks-long nights, early mornings, endless revisions. It was the flagship pitch for a multi-million-dollar partnership with a Fortune 100 logistics firm based in Chicago. She had crafted every chart, written every transition, rebuilt the analytics from scratch when the modeling team fell behind. The pitch was clean, airtight, persuasive. and ready. The day before submission, she opened the shared drive to finalize it. There it was, Logicor Partnership, final. She clicked in. Everything looked familiar. Too familiar. The layout was hers. The phrasing was hers. The entire structure hers. Except one thing. The author tag on the file? Evan Lambert. At first, she thought it was a mistake. A versioning error, maybe. Maybe he had downloaded it to review and saved over it by accident. But then, she looked closer. The bullet points had been slightly reworded. Font sizes adjusted. A few animations added. Cosmetic changes. But the core everything strategic, everything substantial was untouched. Because it was hers. Because he had nothing better to contribute. So he simply rebranded it. No message. No heads up. No. Hey, I'm going to present your work under my name. Nothing. Just quiet theft. Wrapped in corporate courtesy. That night, Casey sat in her apartment with the city lights blinking beyond the window, staring at the screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to type something. An email. A call-out. A protest. But she didn't. Because she already knew what would happen. If she spoke up, they'd call it a misunderstanding. If she pushed back, they'd say she was being territorial. If she raised her voice too loud, they'd brand her difficult. As redo. And that word difficult was a death sentence in rooms filled with men who'd never had to be anything more than present to be praised. So she closed the laptop. She didn't tell Evan. Didn't tell HR. Didn't tell anyone. But the silence didn't protect her. It hollowed her. Because the next day, at the investor presentation, she watched as Evan stood on stage wearing her words like a tailored suit. He clicked through her strategy, quoted her insights, got applause for work he didn't even understand. The board clapped. The CEO smiled. And Casey? She stood at the back of the room, invisible in plain sight. Later, someone turned to her and said, "Wasn't that brilliant? Evan's really growing into the role." She forced a nod, sipped her coffee, tasted nothing. That was the first time she realized. They weren't just ignoring her. They were actively erasing her. Not with malice, but with indifference. And somehow, that was worse. Because they didn't think she was a threat. They thought she was a utility. Replaceable. Transferable. Disposable. But what they didn't know, what Evan didn't know, was that while he was busy performing strategy, Casey was already designing something he'd never be able to steal. Because it didn't live on a slide. It lived in her spine. Casey didn't explode. There were no confrontations. No public resignations. No scathing emails sent at midnight. She showed up the next day, just like always. Laptop in hand, sleeves rolled up, face calm. To the outside world, she looked unchanged, reliable, professional, unbothered. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was recognition. The kind that doesn't crash through the door, but slips in quietly and locks it behind you. She knew now. They weren't ever going to hand her the title. They weren't ever going to say her name in the room where decisions were made. They had made their choice. And it wasn't her. And so, she made hers. She started small. New announcements. New declarations. Just a new encrypted folder on a private drive. A few late-night calls to former colleagues who had left Orion X with scars of their own. People she trusted. People who remembered what it felt like to be valuable but invisible. The project had no name at first. Just an idea. What if we built the thing they keep pretending they want to become? A company with clarity, with agility, with leadership that didn't come from bloodlines or backrooms. She worked in shadows. While the exec team praised Evan's rapid growth, Casey was drafting an architecture blueprint that would make their entire infrastructure look outdated. During client meetings, she listened, really listened, to what they liked, to what they needed, and especially to what Orion X failed to deliver. At home, she began sketching product ideas. mapping out gaps, outlining service protocols based not on hierarchy, but on trust. Some nights, she wondered if it was foolish. If this was all just a coping mechanism, a sandbox for her pride. But then she'd remember the way her name had been wiped from the newsletter. The way Evan smiled during that pitch, like he'd built it himself. The way silence had become her only defense. And she'd open her laptop. Again. She didn't want revenge. Not really. She wanted freedom. She wanted to stop asking for permission to be as good as she already was. Eventually, the project took on a name. Ecliptica. It sounded clean. Fast. Like something built for light to move through it. By month 3, she had an outline. By month 5, a prototype. By month 7, a team of 6. Engineers. Strategists. Compliance experts who were tired of being weaponized for politics. All of it quiet. Deliberate. Intransable. Orion Sheiks had no idea. They thought Casey was still just executing. Still sitting at the kids' table with a good attitude. Still loyal. And, in a way, she was. Loyal to the work. Loyal to the clients. Loyal to the version of herself that refused to be erased. Because the best part about being underestimated is that no one sees you coming. It happened over dinner. A long, slow dinner in Dubai. After a 14-hour negotiation that left everyone raw and slightly buzzed from relief. The deal was nearly done. All the language had been smoothed. The risk models matched. The financials were aligned. And for the first time in months, Casey let herself breathe. She was seated across from Dario Khalil, the CEO of Alcira Group, a logistics and defense conglomerate with reach across the Middle East and Europe. Hard to please. Harder to impress. They were sipping tea when he leaned in slightly, hands steepled over a linen napkin, and asked, "Casey, why are you not running the company?" She blinked. He wasn't joking. His tone wasn't flattering or performative. It was puzzled. Sincere. She started to answer, instinctively, with something diplomatic. "Oh, I'm just part of a larger team." Or, "I work best behind the scenes." But she didn't. Because in that moment, she realized something she hadn't said out loud yet. She didn't know either. Dario continued. "You don't speak like an employee. You speak like the architect. Like the person who built what we just signed." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sipped her tea, felt the steam against her lip, felt something else. A quiet confirmation. Because Dario wasn't the first. 2 weeks earlier, during a Zoom call with a procurement lead in Switzerland, the man had leaned forward, lowered his voice, and said, "Between you and me, if you ever leave Orion X, let us know." He'd said it with a smile. But it wasn't a joke. Then there was the head of compliance at a European biotech partner. A woman named Lena who had reviewed Casey's entire proposal and said, "This doesn't read like something written by committee. It reads like conviction." Again, not flattery. Not empty praise. Recognition. These clients, they weren't loyal to Orion X. They were loyal to her. Because when their questions got hard, Casey had answers. When the language got vague, Casey rewrote it in real time. When executives froze, Casey studied the room. And clients notice. They notice who's doing the work, who shows up prepared, who follows through. And they especially notice who doesn't need a spotlight to deliver results. It wasn't about charisma. It wasn't even about politics. It was about trust. And somehow, without ever meaning to, Casey had built something stronger than brand loyalty. She had built personal credibility. It wasn't loud. It wasn't marketed. But it was there. And it was growing. Later that night, after Dario's question had lingered in the air, he leaned back and said quietly, "If you ever decide to change things, some of us would back you. Not the logo." And just like that, something locked into place. It was no longer about being overlooked. No longer about being passed over. Now, it was about being chosen by the people who mattered most. The clients had already seen the truth. Now, it was just a matter of what Casey would do with it. The ballroom smelled like power and money. Gold-trimmed linen. Crystal chandeliers. A live quartet playing some forgettable Mozart medley. The kind of night built to impress investors and inflate egos. It was Orionex's annual Strategic Growth Gala. But this year, it wasn't about strategy. It was about Evan Lambert. The man who had never led a client meeting alone. The man who needed 3 rounds of coaching just to pronounce data interoperability. The man whose father chaired the board. Tonight, he was being crowned Vice President of Global Partnerships, a title Casey had once been told was under consideration for her, a role she had quietly shaped, defended, and rebuilt from scratch. And now, she was standing under the same lights, not as the honoree, but as the silent footnote. She wore black, simple, sharp, powerful without being loud. She hadn't even wanted to come, but HR had told her she'd be helping transition knowledge during the event. Translation: smile, clap, make Evan look credible. She did all 3. When the spotlight hit the stage, and Evan took the mic with that over-rehearsed humility, Casey stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne in hand, untouched. He thanked his father. He thanked the amazing team. He thanked his incredible mentors who guided him into this role. Not once. Not on sea did he say her name. Not during the speech. Not after. Not even when he toasted. And yet, when the cameras were off, when the board members were mingling and Evan found her standing alone near the risers, he walked over buzzed from applause and entitlement, and said, "Hey, quick thing, can we go over the Brazil deal structure tomorrow? I'm still trying to catch up on those compliance details." "You've got it all in your head." Casey looked at him. "Steady. Neutral." She said simply, "They tend to ask tough questions." He laughed, clueless. "Well, I'll just point them to you. You always know what to say." And there it was. The confirmation. They didn't just want her to step aside. They wanted her to train her own replacement. To smile through it. To vanish with grace. That night, as the gala blurred into a fog of clinking glasses and self-congratulation, Casey stood behind Evan during the group photo. Half in the frame, half in the shadows. And, in that moment, something inside her crystallized. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. They'd made their choice. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that she had already made hers. 2 days earlier, she had booked a second itinerary. Different airline. Different route. No internal tracking. No shared calendar. She would arrive in Sao Paulo 3 days ahead of schedule. Alone. Prepared. Invisible. They thought she would shadow Evan. Support Evan. Lift Evan. But Casey Morgan? She wasn't walking behind anyone anymore. 3 days before the Sao Paulo summit, Casey did something she'd never done in all her years at Orionex. She went off script. Not recklessly. Not out of emotion. But with the precision of a surgeon. It started with a flight. The company had booked her to travel with Evan. First class. Same itinerary. Shared hotel suite block. The optics were perfect. VP in training accompanied by the seasoned strategist. A smooth handoff. A PR moment waiting to be staged. But Casey had already made other plans. Weeks earlier, long before the gala, before the stolen credit, before the board's silence, she had booked a separate ticket. Different airline. Different departure time. Routed through Buenos Aires instead of Miami. Private. Untraceable. Paid for on her personal card. No one in operations questioned it. She told them she was adjusting for client availability. And they believed her, because Casey had built a career on trust. And no one suspected that the most reliable person in the company had finally stopped playing their game. She landed in Sao Paulo 2 days before anyone expected her. New press. New emails. New company car. Just a quiet rideshare from the airport to a boutique hotel she'd picked for its discretion. That night, she reviewed the Trident deal terms in silence, then reworked the final proposal on her laptop, the one not synced to Orion X servers. Encrypted, untouchable. While the executive team was still packing, Casey was already meeting with Luis Arana, the CEO of Bravo Lincoln of the 3 key Trident partners. Their meeting lasted 4 hours. Luis was skeptical, as always. He asked about capital exposure, sovereignty clauses, long-term architecture. He grilled her on risk like a man who had seen promises collapse before. Casey answered everything clearly, confidently, and without needing to circle back. 1. And when she finished walking him through her independent compliance model, the one she built with former Orion X engineers, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said something that didn't surprise her, but still landed like thunder. I trust you, Casey, but I don't trust Orion X. She nodded, then leaned forward, lowered her voice, and asked, what if I could give you the same deal without the noise? No politics, no shadow hierarchy, just results. Luis didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. Really looked. Then he said, you already know the answer. Later that night, Casey opened her laptop again. 3 tabs, 3 folders, 3 client profiles. Telnova, Eurocom, Bravalink. All of them had her number. All of them had made subtle remarks in recent weeks. All of them had questioned some out loud, some between the lines. Why she wasn't running things herself. And now, with one shift in flight, she was. Not officially, not with titles, but with trust, with timing, with truth. The next morning, Evan landed in Sao Paulo. The company tracker showed Casey was still in New York. His assistant messaged her, confused. She didn't respond, because, by then, she wasn't in their system. She was already in the room, already closing the door behind her. And the best part? They wouldn't even realize what she'd taken until it was gone. There was no press release, no confrontation in the boardroom, no HR meeting with tension thick in the air. Casey didn't make a scene. She made a move. While Orion X still believed she was prepping Evan for the Sao Paulo presentation, Casey was finalizing something else entirely. A qui transfer. Of strategy. Of loyalty. Of power. She didn't send a resignation letter. She didn't slam any doors. She simply stopped feeding a machine that had run on her brilliance without ever crediting it. Instead, on a quiet Wednesday morning just as the Orion X team was still rehearsing their slides, Casey opened her personal laptop. Encrypted, secure, untethered. 3 emails, 3 clients. Each message only had 4 words. We're ready to begin. No company letterhead. No CC'd executives. Just Casey's name. And that was enough. Within hours, the responses came back. First from Telnova. Schedule us this week. Then from Eurocom. Let's discuss next steps. www. And finally from Bravo Link. We're in. Quietly. No dramatic betrayal. No lawsuits. Just momentum shifting away from Orion X towards something they couldn't see coming. Casey wasn't stealing. She wasn't poaching. She didn't need to. She had been the constant in every late-night call. The name clients trusted when the numbers didn't align. The voice they leaned on when politics made projects messy. And now that she'd stepped out from under the Orion X banner, they followed her, not the brand. At HQ, no one even noticed. Not at first. She had turned off all notifications, set her corporate email to passive redirect, disabled her internal logins 2 weeks earlier under the guise of system maintenance. Evan thought she was simply working behind the scenes. The board assumed she was on-site prepping for negotiations. No one thought to ask if Casey was done. But she was. Not out of defeat, but out of design. Because power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply walks away. And when it does, the silence that follows is louder than anything you could have said in anger. She didn't post about it, didn't update her LinkedIn, didn't take a victory lap. Because it wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about knowing final that she didn't owe them another version of herself to fix what they kept breaking. So, she let go. Let them run their meetings. Let them present the pitch she'd already made irrelevant. Let them realize too late what her presence had been worth. Because by the time they noticed she was gone, the clients had already moved on. And that was the point. She didn't burn the bridge. She didn't need to. She just walked across it, built a better one on the other side, and let them stand there, watching, wondering when it all began to fall apart. They weren't expecting her. The room was already full. Industry executives, reporters, tech analysts scribbling in digital notebooks. The future of Orion X was about to be pitched, and all eyes were on the man at the center, Evan Lambert. Standing stiff in a tailored navy suit, surrounded by 2 junior VPs and a nervous compliance manager, he looked every bit the part. Until Casey walked in. No introduction, no fanfare, no flashbulbs, just the soft click of heels on marble. As she stepped into the room like she'd never left it, the CEO of Merrick Dvorsky Group, Orion X's last hope at salvaging face, looked up and froze mid-sentence. He blinked, then smiled slowly. Casey Morgan? Grayson Lambert, Orion X's chairman, turned around. The color drained from his face. Casey extended her hand to Merrick. Calm, steady. It's good to see you again. He took it, firmly. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. She smiled. I'm not joining. I'm representing. There was a pause, a shift in the room. One of those silences that rearranges the air. Grayson cleared his throat. This is a closed session, Casey. She didn't flinch. Actually, it's a joint session. Your team submitted conflicting claims about infrastructure rights. Merrick's team requested transparency. I'm here to provide it. All eyes turned to Merrick. He nodded. We need alignment. And full review. That's non-negotiable. Casey calmly opened her folder. Inside, a leaner architecture. Signed approvals from every major client. Updated specs her former company never even saw coming. Evan tried to speak. I think there's been a miscommunication. She looked at him. Sharp, clear, collected. There hasn't. You presented a foundation you didn't lay. I'm here with the blueprint. Grayson stepped forward, desperation behind his mask of composure. You really want to work with someone who abandons their team mid-deal? Casey turned to Merrick, not Grayson. I don't abandon ships. I rebuild them without the ones who drill holes in the hull. Silence again. Then Merrick spoke. We'll proceed with dual consideration. But I want Casey's proposal prioritized. It would have been enough. But Casey wasn't done. Not yet. She looked Grayson in the eye. Voice low, but firm. One condition. I'll move forward, but only if Orion X is removed from this process. I won't work alongside people who erased my name, then asked me to hold their crown steady while they wore it. The room held its breath. Merrick turned to Grayson. Is that acceptable? Grayson's jaw tightened, his legacy unraveling beneath his shoes. For a second, he looked like he might argue. But there was nothing left to say. He nodded, then walked out. No defense. No denial. Just the quiet shuffle of power slipping out the door. And Casey? She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just returned to the table, took her seat, and opened her notes. Because for the first time in her career, she wasn't in the room to prove herself. She was there to build something they couldn't touch. And the world was finally watching. It happened without a logo reveal, without confetti, without a paid influencer shouting it on social media. At 9 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday, the press release went live. No headlines, no hashtags, Just a simple, direct announcement posted to a media portal few had even heard of yet. Ecliptica, Inc. is proud to announce a multi-billion-dollar partnership with Telnova, Eurocom, and Bravolink. The agreement, valued at $2.1 billion over 7 years, will deliver secure, modular cloud infrastructure across 3 continents. For inquiries, contact press at ecliptica.tech. Signed, Casey Morgan, CEO. That was it. No mission statement. No inspirational quotes. No mention of Orion X. Because she didn't need to remind the world of who failed her. She just had to show them what she'd built in their absence. At 9:12 a.m., the first email came in. Not from a friend. Not from an old colleague. But from a tech columnist at The Verge. Is this real? Who's behind Ecliptica? How did you land all 3? By 10:30 a.m., there were already 5 articles. The silent takeover. End of quote. How one woman outmaneuvered an empire. The cloud queen we never saw coming. Casey sat in a modest corner suite. No skyscraper. On no glass table. Just a laptop, a cup of tea, and the quiet kind of thrill that doesn't ask for applause, because it already knows its worth. By noon, Orion X had called 3 emergency meetings. By 1 o'clock, their stock had dipped 6%. By 2 o'clock, a junior analyst leaked a screenshot of a panicked Slack thread. No one at Ecliptica responded. No rebuttals. No comment. Because there was nothing to defend. The work spoke for itself. And this time, the work had her name on it. At 2:45 p.m., her co-founder Rahim walked into the office, holding a printed copy of the press release like it was a birth certificate. "You gonna frame this?" he asked. Casey took it, ran her fingers along the line where it said her name. Not in fine print. Not buried in the credits. Not someone else's placeholder. Just Casey Morgan, CEO. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'll just let the next release speak louder." Because this wasn't the finish line. This was the starting gun. Ecliptica didn't just inherit clients. It inherited trust. Trust that Casey had built over years of quiet resilience, midnight negotiations, and unspoken loyalty. And now, for the first time, she wasn't asking for a seat. She was building the table. With people who saw her. With people who never needed her to shrink in order to belong. At 3 p.m., her phone buzzed. A voicemail. No caller ID. But she knew the voice before he even spoke. Grayson. His tone was low, resigned. "Was this personal?" he asked. "You didn't have to do it this way." She didn't finish the message. She didn't need to. Because the answer was simple. Yes. It was personal. It was also professional. It was overdue. And now, it was irreversible. By the time the headlines faded, and the press inquiries slowed to a manageable trickle, Casey found herself sitting in the quiet again. Not the lonely kind, but the steady kind. The kind that comes after the storm, not before it. She stood in the main hallway of Ecliptica's new headquarters. Nothing flashy. No glass ceilings or 10-foot fountains. Just warm lighting, open space, and a brushed steel plaque mounted on the wall. It read, Ecliptica, built with clarity, led with conviction. Her name wasn't in the logo, wasn't stamped across every wall, because she didn't need to be everywhere. She just needed to be exactly where it mattered. It took her a long time to understand that. For years, she had tried to be visible, in places that were designed to look right through her. She had handed over her ideas in rooms where others collected the praise. She had played the long game, trusting that merit would rise. But sometimes, the system isn't broken. Sometimes, it's working exactly as it was built. To keep certain voice quiet, to elevate convenience over capability, and to reward familiarity over courage. She had learned that lesson slowly, through disappointment, through silence, through watching people with less skill but more entitlement walk ahead like they were born to lead. But she didn't let it break her. She let it teach her. And what it taught her was this: you don't have to scream to be powerful. You don't have to be seen by everyone to matter. And most of all, you don't have to stay in a place that shrinks you just because you helped build it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away quietly and build something no one can erase. Because the truth is, they can take your credit, they can take your access, they can take your seat at their table, but they can't take your mind, your integrity, your vision. Those things don't belong to them. They never did. And if you're willing to build, not for noise, not for show, but for permanence, then the day will come when your presence speaks so loudly, you won't ever need to raise your voice again. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, talked over, or erased, don't just fight for space in their world. Build your own, not to prove a point, not to get revenge, but to become undeniable. Because permanence doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply stands and stays long after the noise is gone.